Just a reminder to us before I begin the Gospel reading. Today is the third Sunday of the month, and so on the third Sunday it's an open discussion at the end of the homily, question-answer discussion stuff. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
A reading from the Gospel of Thomas. These are the secret sayings that the living Jesus spoke, and Didymus Judas Thomas recorded. And he said, "Whoever discovers the interpretations of these sayings will not taste death." Jesus says, those who seek should not stop seeking until they find. When they find, they will be disturbed. When they are disturbed, they will marvel. When they marvel, they will rule over all. And when they rule, they will rest. Jesus says, if your leaders say to you, "Look, the kingdom of God is in the sky," then the birds of the sky will precede you. If they say to you, "It is in the sea," then the fish will precede you. Rather, the kingdom of God is inside you and outside you. When you know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will understand that you are children of the living Father. But if you do not know yourselves, then you live in poverty, and you are the poverty. The Gospel inspired by God. Once upon a time, in the middle of the night, in a very dark night, there was a man walking along the deserted streets of a city. And in the distance, about 100 yards down, under the only street lamp on the street, he saw somebody else crouching on his hands and knees. So as he got nearer, he figured out this guy had lost something and was looking for it. So he approached him and said, "Friend, can I help you? You appear to have lost something." And the other guy says, "Yeah, I'd really appreciate your help." He said, "What did you lose?" He said, "I lost a big bunch of keys." And the guy said, "Okay, that should be easy to find." So they got on their hands and knees, they're casting about, and 10 minutes later, they still haven't found them. So the stranger says to him, "Are you sure this is where you lost them?" And the guy said, No, I didn't lose them here. I lost them way over there." And he says, why are you looking here?" He says, "This is the only place with light." Now, I had a similar experience myself a few months ago. I was driving from home down to Palo Alto. I come down on Thursday nights really late, so I typically arrive down in Palo Alto around 10 o'clock, 10:30. And the first 5 miles of my journey is on a dirt road. And I come across a lot of animals. So sometimes there's deer, sometimes there's wild pigs, sometimes there's a mountain lion once, bobcats fairly frequently. But this occasion, I see a lot of rabbits. On this occasion, I'm driving, and there's this rabbit running along the road in front of me. So I slow down, and the rabbit slows down and just hops along. And then I stop, and the rabbit stops, and I wait for 2 or 3 minutes, and he's just sitting there. So I start up slowly, so he starts running slowly. So I speed up a little bit, and he speeds up a little bit. Now there's acres and acres of land on the left side and the right side, but he won't go there. And I figure, what the hell are you at, dude? So a mile and a half later, he's still on the road in front of me, bouncing along in front. And then I figured it out. He was running along the road because that's where the light was. And it was a lot easier. If you went to the left or to the right, it's all bush and rocks and whatever. So this was a much easier path. So he stayed on the path because there was light there and it was a much nicer surface to run on. So 5 miles later, I finally got rid of him. When I reached the tarmac, he took off someplace else. Now, that's a little bit like how we live life, so many of us. It's a lot easier to look outside for the truth than it is to look inside for the truth. It's easier, but it's not faster. The fastest way of all to get to the truth is to look inside, not to look outside. Now, if you know how to look outside, you can find it there as well. But although it's easier to look outside of us, because that's how we've been trained, it is not faster to look outside of us. So meditation is a much faster route to truth than science is. Although when you do good science that's prepared to infuse metaphysical principles in its resources will also arrive at the truth. But the fastest way to arrive at the truth is to know how to look deeply inside yourself, because you're built in God's image and likeness. And if you know how to look inside through meditation or real introspection, you find truth a lot faster than just looking outside yourself. So that's what I want to talk about today, and I'm going to make 4 main points this morning. The first one I say is, look, how you look is more important even than where you look. The second point I want to make then, I want to look at hindsight is 20/20. Thirdly, human know thyself, the third point. And then the pièce de résistance, God, the digital physicist. It's going to be fun. God, the digital physicist. So the first piece, how you look is even more important than where you look. Obviously, knowing where to look is important. This guy was looking under the street lamp for keys he had lost someplace else. He's not going to find them there. So knowing where to look is important, but it is not half as important as learning how to look. Because if you look even in the right place, but you don't know how to look in the right place, you still won't find it. So if you don't know how to look, you can look everywhere and find nothing. If you know how to look, in some senses, wherever you look, you're going to find the truth. So I'll give you a few just metaphors or examples to illustrate this. Up where I live, there's almost no noise pollution whatsoever. I'm out in the middle of the forest. My nearest neighbours are 2 miles away from me. So the only sounds I'll hear occasionally are little aeroplanes overhead. There's an airport about 10 miles away from me. And occasionally I hear little planes heading for the airport. But if you look into a blue sky, it is very difficult to see a small airplane, not because you can't see it, but because your eye doesn't know where to focus. So as you're scanning a blue sky, your eyes have no focal length. They don't know what distance away to look. And so even if your eyes encounter the plane and their focus is incorrect, you won't see the plane, even when you're looking at it. So trying to find these small planes in the sky is really difficult. But once you've found it, you cannot see it again. You can look away completely, and you look back immediately, it's moved, you'll find it immediately, because your eyes have figured out what the correct focal distance is. So it's how you focus your eyes that determine whether you're going to see it or not where you look. You could be looking right at the plane, but if your focal point isn't correct, you look through the plane, and you won't see the plane. So learning how to look is much more important than learning even where to look. I'll give you a second example. I remember years and years and years ago walking down University Avenue just shortly after I arrived in Palo Alto, so maybe September 1987. And there was a shop called Woolworth's there at that stage. If many of you remember that. And I was standing looking in to the window of Woolworth's. I wanted to try to buy binders. But because of the angle of the sun is shining right on the glass, and all I can see is my own reflection. So I'm trying to see what's inside the pane of glass, but all I'm seeing is my reflection. And then at some stage I get it. I need to shift my focusing mechanism in order to be able to see through my reflection into the window. And I change my focal point, and now I can see what the contents of the shop are. But initially all I could see was a reflection, from the glass. So learning how to adjust your focusing mechanism is really important. So learning how to look is much more important than learning where to look. Those of you who've been in my home, the inside of my front door and the inside of my back door, I've done 2 black and white paintings. And they're both faces of the Christ figure. But with one of them, people will look at it for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, and not be able to see it. And then all of a sudden they see it, and you can never not see it again. And it was a photograph that was taken over the Alps during the Second World War, where a reconnaissance flight was photographing the terrain. And it's just a black and white photograph, so the white is the snow, and the black are the shadows. And when the guy came back to his laboratory to develop them, all of a sudden, the face of Christ leapt out of him. So you can stare at this thing for half an hour, 20 minutes, 2 hours, whatever, and you may not even be able to see it. Some people will see it almost immediately. Some people will take 20 minutes. But once you see it, you can never not see it again. But the trick is, it's kind of a soft gaze. If you're looking harshly at it, you won't see it at all. But if you change your gaze, all of a sudden it leaps out, and then you cannot never not see it again. My front door, I've painted a different one. And this one, if you look at it intently for about 30 seconds, and then blink, and then look onto a white surface, all of a sudden the face comes out, because it's an after image. So again, it has to do with how you look being much more important than where you look. And this is so important in our spirituality. It is how we look at life that determines the truths we find. Not so much where we look, although it is important to know, where did I lose my keys? It is important, but it's not at all important as learning to how I look is what determines it. And so when I then look at science, the pity of science for me is that it has failed to build metaphysical premises into its investigation. So I'll give you an example. There's a very famous linguist in the 1930s, 1940s called George Ziff, Z-I-P-F. He was a linguist in Harvard. And he discovered a very interesting law. It's called Ziff's law now. And this states that you can take any human language. There's like 7,000 human languages. You can take any written human language, and if you take a tract, a passage, 3 or 4 pages of script, and if you do a frequency distribution on it, if you figure out how frequently does each word occur in the text. So maybe the word "the" occurs maybe 75 times, and the word "and" occurs 43 times, and the word "but" occurs 23 times, or whatever. If you do a frequency distribution on how often each word appears in the text, it's in a dead straight line. If you do it logarithmically, it's in a dead straight line. So the most frequent word in the text will occur exactly 5 times more frequently than the 5th most frequent word. And it will occur 17 times more frequently than the 17th most frequent word. So it's an actually straight line graph. So an extraordinary. Any language on the planet, you take any passage, any significant size of passage, and you do a frequency chart of how often words occur. It'll be a dead straight line when you plot it logarithmically. Now you take this law, and I want to apply it to DNA. So the claim is that 97% of our DNA is junk. Now, it's a ridiculous claim, absolutely ridiculous. There ain't no junk in nature. So the claim is that only 3% is useful. That 3% of our DNA, is responsible for our form and our function. So that the proteins created by this 3% creates muscles, the particular form of muscles and the functions that muscles have. They create eye cells, and they create the function and the form of eye cells. So the claim is that this 3% is responsible completely for all form and all function of all organisms. And that the other 97% is just junk. It's totally ridiculous. When you apply Zipp's law to DNA, and it's been done in Harvard, where they take a DNA sequence, and they subject it to analysis, what they find out is that the 3% of our DNA, which is responsible for form and function, is not a language. But the 97%, which is not responsible for our form and function, is a language. Now, what does science do with this? It's just a nice anomaly. If you know how to look at this information, what is it telling you? It is telling you that the creator of all that is has encoded a message for people. That when some organism develops that is intelligent enough to look at the other 97%, there's a message embedded in it. It's like you buy some kind of an apparatus that you have to assemble yourself. And there's 2 kinds of instructions. There's the instructions of how do you assemble this particular piece of equipment. That's good. But the second piece is, the manual tells you, how do you use this equipment? If you know how to assemble stuff, but you have no idea how to use the stuff, what good is it to you? And so 3% of the DNA is how to assemble the material, how to build a human body, how to build a rhododendron tree, or whatever. The other 97% is what to do with it. So literally this 97%, if you follow Zipp's law, and you know how to look at it, in my opinion, is a coded message from the Creator saying, this is why you were created. This is the purpose for you. Here's what I intended you to do. It's about love. So 97% of our DNA is teaching us how to use the equipment. And the other 3% is how to assemble the equipment. But if you don't know how to look at it, all you see is Zipp's law, interesting, 97% is junk, but it follows a law. So that's my first point then. How you look is much more important than where you look. Second point then, hindsight is 20/20. We realize this when you look back historically, because you've got a bigger context in which to, assess and process the experiences of the past, you can see connections that you couldn't see when you were on so close to it. So it's the difference between a bird's eye view and a worm's eye view. The worm is down at ground zero. It's very, very difficult to see connections. When you take yourself out of the picture, elevate a little bit, you get a much better look at it. So if you go on Google Earth, you can see from 10,000 feet what what your house looks like. So the more you elevate, the more you see the context in which your house resides. And so history is like that a little bit. So it's fascinating to me that being separated historically from event often is a better way of understanding the event. I'll give you an example. Scripture scholars in the 20th century have a much, much better understanding of Jesus and his times and the scriptures than Bible scholars of, let's say, the 5th century. Although they were 1,500 years nearer the event, we have much more comprehension today than guys in the 5th century did, although they were only 500 years removed from the life of Jesus. And why is it? For several reasons. Some of them technological, and some of them having to do with how we're looking differently at the material. So technologically, for instance, the use of carbon dating allows us to be able to determine, when a manuscript came into being. So they couldn't do that in the 5th century. So you could, for instance, have a hoax, a document that purported to have been written at a particular time, and you look at the actual papyrus and you do carbon dating it, and it certainly wasn't written, at the time it claimed to have been written. And so you get, for instance, the book of Daniel claims to have been written, about 500 years BC. It was much, much later than that. So the document is claiming age that it doesn't really have. So by carbon dating, you can figure out just the physical material, how old that is. So that's one way in which we can know a lot more about stuff than 5th century scholars did. But a lot of it has to do with just how we look at the material. And so, for instance, critical thinking and form thinking, when you look, for instance, at paleography is the study of ancient writings. And you realize that at different stages, even within the same language group, let's say take Greek, that at different stages, Greek fonts develop differently. And so if you know paleography and you come across a particular manuscript written in Greek, you can tell from the font that's used what period of time it came from. 5th century scholars couldn't do that. So from using your computer, if you want to kind of print out a document, there's 30 or 40 different fonts you can use. There's Helvetica, and there's Geneva, and there's a Blackboard, and there's a whole bunch. You can choose any script or font size or type you want. That was true of the ancient languages. Different stages, they use slightly different font types. So if you know that, when you go back and you take a document, you can immediately determine what period of time it came from. Some has to do with punctuation. So for instance, the Greek language didn't use commas until the 3rd century after Jesus. So if you find a document with comments in it that's claiming to be written at the time of Jesus, it's a hoax. They didn't use commas in the Greek language, at the time of Jesus. It came much, much later. And so punctuation, and font tell you very, very often when the actual text was written. So now, 20 centuries later, we have a much better idea of when the stuff was written and by whom. We can look at stuff like form criticism. So, for instance, the given wisdom up to the 1850s was that the first 5 books of the Hebrew Scriptures, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, were written by Moses. And then German scholars in the 1850s began to look, what they call it form criticism, at these actual books. And they realized there are 4 totally different strands of material that have been woven together, redacted, and edited. And they're called J, E, P, and D. They're called the Yahwist tradition, the Yahwistic tradition, the Deuteronomic, and the priestly. So there was 4 totally different strands of information that were redacted and woven together into a tapestry. But the language is very different. The names they have for God is different. In one group, God is called Yahweh. In another one, God is called Elohim. And so you can tease these apart and find out at what stages they were actually written and by whom and what was the kind of theological agenda of the particular writers. So you can tease them asunder now. They couldn't do that before the 1850s. So courtesy of these brilliant German scholars. You look at stuff like anachronisms. One of my favorite visual ones is, I remember seeing a movie one time, I don't know if it was the 10 Commandments or not, and Moses is up on a hilltop praying to God. And there's a battle going on between the Israelites and the Amalekites. And Moses is praying to God, please give us the victory. Please give us the victory. And all of a sudden you see Moses is wearing a wristwatch. Somebody didn't do the editing really well. So that would be kind of anachronistic. Or, for instance, the statement in the book of Genesis, that Abraham had a flock of camels. Now, Abraham flourished around 1850 BC. Camels were not domesticated until 1300 BC. So we know that whenever this scripture was written, it certainly wasn't written at the time of Abraham, because he couldn't have had domesticated camels at that stage. So there's lots and lots of ways in which, we're in a much better position now to understand ancient history and scriptures than people who were much nearer the event. Then in 1945 and 46, two extraordinary finds came to light. 1945, in a little village in Egypt called Nag Hammadi, we found the Nag Hammadi scrolls, 52 codices of thousands of pages of scripture that had been hidden away because in 367 AD, Athanasius, the Bishop of Alexander, had outlawed all Gnostic scriptures. And so the monks had to hide the material. And it lay hidden for 1,500 years and then came to light, and it threw a whole bunch of information. For instance, this Gospel of Thomas, we found that for the first time. Now, other pieces of it had been found in 1898 in a place called Oxyrhynchus. So we knew some of it, but this was the only full text of Thomas's Gospel. And it's a very, very ancient Gospel. It may actually be older than the canonical Gospels. It may go back to 50 AD, whereas the first of the canonical Gospels was written in 70 AD. And so a whole treasure trove of information became available. Then a year later, in fact between 1946 and 1956, in Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls were unearthed. A whole cache of ancient manuscripts from Judaism, which threw a whole bunch of light on the Hebrew scriptures and subsequently on the Christian scriptures. So sometimes the further you're away from event, the more you understand what the event was. I'm sure you can see this even in your own life. So that's my second point. The third point then is, know thyself, man, know thyself. Beginning with, let's say, the Buddha. The Buddha flourished about 550 BC. And the core of his teaching was being awake. In fact, that's the nickname he gave to himself. He wasn't born and named the Buddha. There's a story told at one stage when he had begun his teaching that the Brahmins sent emissaries to him because they were really upset with him. He had no business teaching, theology. He wasn't a Brahmin. He was a Kshatriya, which was a warrior leader. So what is he doing? Dealing in scriptures and dealing in theologies and dealing in religion. And so they send emissaries to him and they say to him, why are you teaching? Are you a sage? He says, no, I'm not a sage. Are you a prophet? No, I'm not a prophet. Are you an angel? No, I'm not an angel. So they say, well, who are you? You have to give us some answer so we can go back and tell the Brahmins, who you are. And he said, I am Buddha. And it's a pun. The Buddha just literally means, I am awake. That's what the name means. So it was a nickname he gave to himself. I am awake. And awakening has to do with understanding the nature of reality, or understanding the nature of the self. And that was the Buddha's great, great insight. What reality is and who the self, who the person is. So he came to that great conclusion about maybe 500 BC. About 50 years later, on almost a contemporary of his, is Socrates. Socrates flourished between 469 BC and 399 BC. And he would make two great statements. One of them, man, know thyself. And the other one, the unexamined life is not worth living. And so both of them will come to the same conclusion, that it is knowing yourself and knowing reality. This is what the journey is about. And in today's gospel, Thomas, 400 years after Socrates, is saying exactly the same thing. If you know yourself, you will be known, and you will understand that you are a child of God. But if you do not know yourself, you will live in poverty. In fact, you are poverty, Thomas is saying. So the key to the whole thing is knowledge of the self. Now, not to be confused with knowledge of the ego. The ego is not the self. The ego is simply the CEO of a particular state of consciousness that we grandiosely call waking consciousness. But the soul is the center of the psyche, not the ego. So knowledge of self is not just knowledge about the ego. So all of these systems realize that it is delving deeply into the self. This is the fastest road completely to truth. And this is the whole purpose of meditation. The entire object of meditation is the disidentification with ego so that the self and the soul can come through. So you establish connection with Source. And now I want to get onto the meat of the homily, my fourth point, which is, I call it, God the Digital Physicist. There is a new branch of physics, just maybe the last 20, 25 years, which is called digital physics. And it comes from information theory. And it is the belief system that, in some senses, the physical universe is a computer program. That has been, it's been programmed, and we're looking at a particular version of this program. So if you take this as a purely physical phenomenon, it's one thing. If you incorporate the metaphysical into it, what it tells me is that we are God's video game. Literally, we are God's video game. Now, I think this video game, God produced 4 versions of this video game. It's like any kind of IT technology. There'll be the beta version, and they'll test it out first, and then be 2 or 3 more versions, 3 and 4, whatever. We're living in version 4 of God's video game, I think. Version 1 of God's video game is like, if you've ever written a short story, and you've created characters, and you've created a plot, and it leads to a conclusion. And in some senses, it's a predetermined conclusion. You, the author, have determined what the conclusion of the story is going to be. That's version 1. So you've created very vibrant characters, and you've created a very interesting plot, and you've created a denouement, a kind of an end point where the whole thing results. And that's very, very interesting. But that's only version 1. If you're a really, really good writer, you are a programmer, you could create a version 2 where you build some element of randomness into the storyline. And so even as the author, you're not quite sure what the ending is going to be. So you're going to let the characters interact with each other. And in some senses, they're going to determine how the plot evolves and what the conclusion is going to look like. So as you start out and you write this kind of a story, you have no idea where it's going to end. But you're developing your characters, and as the characters interact with each other, the dialogue proceeds, and that creates the next element of the plot, and that determines what the final outcome is going to be. But as the author starting off, you had no idea what the end of the story was going to look like. That's version 2. Version 3 of the story of the program is where you build free will into your characters. Now the characters come alive in a totally different way. The characters have the ability to say yes or no in any situation and to interact with each other. Now the author has no idea where this drama is going to end, because the players have been empowered with the ability, to countermand, to accelerate or to create obstacles to any plot that might be emerging. That's version 3 of the story. And version 4 of the story is where the characters, not only is there randomness in the equation, not only is there free will in the equation, but the characters in the play can interact with the programmer. They can interact with the author. They're not just interacting with each other, they're interacting with the author. And now the story can go anyway. It really is a powerful story at this stage. Now my belief system is we're living in a version 4 of the story. God has created this extraordinary video, this extraordinary program, but God has built randomness into it. God has built free will into some of the players, and God has built the ability to interact with everything in the drama. And so we are co-creators of where this is headed. So we're living in a version 4 of this story. Now, the question I ask myself then is, literally, why in God's name would God do this? So why, in fact, would God, unity consciousness, even self-fragment or self-separate? And all the mystical tradition says that she does. There's a great teaching in the Kabbalah, the great Jewish mystical tradition, that God self-fragmented into sephirot, into like tongues of fire, and that all these tongues of fire went off to have experiences. And at the end, they will all reunite with themselves. Now, that makes total sense to me. So why would God self-separate or self-fragment? For this reason, let me use 2 metaphors. Imagine you have a beehive with 30,000 bees in it. And imagine that they have to operate as a unit. So every morning, this big clump of bees, all stuck together, fly through the air and go up about a mile, and they try to land on a flower and extract pollen from the flower as a bunch, and then go back to the hive in the evening time. Now what's happened is, they've just had a single experience, and they've been able to land in maybe 4 or 5 flowers, and that's it, and they're only getting one kind of pollen because they're confined to what they can land on. Suppose they decided to work as 30,000 different members, interdependent but not clumped together. So every morning, 30,000 would go off in different directions. Now they can land on, instead of just landing in 5 or 6 flowers, they can land in 150 or 200,000 flowers. And they come back in the evening with all different kinds of pollen, which means that the honey is much more succulent because it's coming from many, many different flower types. And they've come back with 30,000 stories instead of just a single story. That's why God self-fragments. God speeds up her experiences by self-fragmenting into all of these units of individual consciousness that can generate experiences that they bring back to the hive. And so the whole thing evolves. Now I'm differentiating between the transcendence of God and the immanence of God. The transcendence, which is beyond language completely, and the immanent, which is that part of God which evolves. So let me use a second metaphor. Suppose a group of us decided to form a movie club. And once a week, we go as a group, so there's 10 of us, and we all go off as a group of 10, and we go to a movie. And then we come back, and we discuss the movie. So it's interesting, and we're learning stuff. We're learning different perspectives on the movie. But then at some stage we say, you know what? In order to generate more experience, more movie experiences, why doesn't each one of us go off to a different movie theatre? And we'll come back, we've seen 10 different movies, and we'll share what we've found with each other. And now, our experience really accelerates, because now we're looking at 10 different movies at the same time and speaking about 10 different movies. And then at some stage, after 2 years of that, we say, why do we have to confine ourselves to just looking at movies? Why don't we just have other experiences, and then bring back these? And so, one guy goes off to a movie, another goes off mountain climbing, another goes off swimming, somebody else goes off to play chess, somebody else goes off to assist at the birth of a baby. And then we come back and we start sharing experiences. And now there's a huge multiplicity of learning that's happening, because we've generated a whole bunch of different kinds of experiences, and we're bringing those back to the equation. So that, in my opinion, is why God self-separates, because she is trying to speed up the process of evolution. And she does that by self-fragmenting into billions of different units of consciousness, each of which generates experience and brings them back to the hive. Now, we actually do this. You see this actually in the history of evolution. Initially, the only way life promoted itself was through self-cloning. So individual cells would clone themselves, create identical versions of themselves, and so you get maybe 50 or 60 or 70 versions of the original bacterium or protozoa, but they're totally identical, genetically identical. That means that evolution is proceeding really, 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 really slowly. And so at some stage of the equation, evolution created sex. And sex had this extraordinary ability. By mixing two totally different sets of chromosomes, you're absolutely creating a whole variety of different possible outcomes. So sexuality was a huge breakthrough, biologically speaking and evolutionarily speaking, because it allowed the experiences to be generated and the differences and the variety to really, really cascade. And every single one of us did the very same thing. At some stage, years and years and years ago, maybe 25 years ago or 40 years ago or whatever, you were a single zygote, a single cell. But it was very hard to generate a lot of experiences as a single cell. So you divided into 2, and then 4, and then 8, 16, 32, whatever, and you kept multiplying until now you are 50 trillion cells. There are 50 trillion cells making up this organism that you call yourself. And each one of them is having experiences, but they're bringing the experiences back to the hive, and they're sharing the experiences together. Even though some of them have clustered into particular interest groups, like there's a group that specializes in being heart cells, there's a group that specializes in being eye cells, there's a group that specializes in being kidney cells, but they're all part of this organism. So you consist of 50 trillion members, each of whom is generating experiences, but you're bringing it all back to this organism that you call yourself. You're working as a unity, but the unity is an interdependence of 50 trillion members. So that is the metaphor for God in some senses. It was necessary for God, who was a unity consciousness, to self-fragment into a duality and then a multiplicity in order to generate experiences that are then brought back to the hive. And you do this yourself as a human being. Every single one of your cells is generating experiences, all of which are contributing to the experience of you as the organism. And every single one of us, all 7 billion human beings, are generating experiences, all of which we're meant to bring back to the hive of unity consciousness with God. In fact, all creation, whether it's a flower, a hippopotamus, a butterfly, an avatar, a banana slug, or a human being, we're all individual units of consciousness generating experiences that all go back to the hive, which is God. All right, guys. Fire. Georgie.
Can we, this is something I believe, can we interpret what you said?
Yeah, just right there. Go Good. Use the mic, George. Can you start again?
Okay. Start again. My memory. Let's see. Can we interpret? Because this is something I believe that as knowledge, as we gain more knowledge, understanding of Jesus's parables and morality changes.
Yes. Yes. The essence of any great teacher, in my opinion, is that a great teacher does not tell us stuff we don't know. A great teacher rolls back the amnesia which has occluded us from the wisdom which is our nature. We're all built in God's image and likeness. And so in some senses, we contain within ourselves all of the answers to all of the questions. But we've covered it over with amnesia. And then we've been schooled. And we think that a teacher is somebody who takes an empty vessel called a student and fills it up with data points that we call knowledge. There's a huge difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is just understanding how the physical universe operates, and it's important, but it's not most important. More important is wisdom, and wisdom is the understanding of how the metaphysical universe works, because the physical universe is simply a kind of a projection of the metaphysical. It's like you're looking, at a screen. If we took a screen and we projected a family event on the screen, and you're looking at family members, running around on the screen, and you want to say to John, John, what are you eating? The movie is not going to be able to respond to you. You have to find the real John and ask John, what were you eating when that movie was taken? And you have to go back there. So the metaphysical, is the ultimate reality, and the physical is a projection. So we're looking at a movie screen. So you can't interact as much with the movie screen as you can interact with, the people being portrayed on the movie screen. So metaphysics is about wisdom. It's about how the reality, the deepest reality works. And the physical universe is about, about data points. And so a great teacher then is somebody who rolls back for us the amnesia so that we remember, who we are and why we're here. Yeah. Margaret, you had your hand up.
Well, this is sort of maybe a communication issue, but when you were talking about, all going to the same movie and then different movies, there's some commonality, they're movies.
Yes.
But then you went and brought that image further out to different experiences. And I was thinking, well, when you come back to talk about them in a group, there's maybe someone in the group has never been in swimming or whatever it is. And so unless you're really articulate and you couldn't explain that to the group, so you're bringing bits and pieces back. So the group gets some pieces, and then what? Okay.
So let me use another image. It's a great question. If you stumble upon an apple, and you decide to eat it, and you reach for the apple, and you're beginning to salivate already, and the mouth says, okay, give us a bite. And the hand says, no, I found it. You say, what do you mean you found it? I found it. And the leg says, no, you didn't. I brought you over there. It belongs to me. And then the gut says, guys, you guys don't know how to process an apple. It has to go into the stomach. And the gastric juice has to do a number on it. So I'm the guy, who needs this apple. But the hand refuses to hold on. The hand refuses to let go of it. And so you can regard the system as independent, discrete parts, or you can realize that they're all together and that they're all assisting each other. The legs were necessary to get to the apple. The hand was necessary to grab the apple. The mouth is necessary to chew the apple. The gastric juices are necessary to break it down and to metabolize it into energy form. So they're all parts. So in order for the organism to have an experience, individual parts have to do individual pieces of it. So in that sense, the individual parts of God, the humans or banana slugs or whatever, they all have their role in generating experiences, but it is God who's having the entire experience. So anything that the hand contributes or the leg contributes is being experienced by the organism itself. So every metaphor is going to break down at some stage. But it's a great question. And so the truth is that when we realize the unity of consciousness, all the parts are working together and they all have particular functions. But it's the organism that's benefiting from the effects. So once I've eaten the apple, the metabolism which converts the apple into energy is now available to my hand and my leg and my mouth and my gut and my head. So every part is actually benefiting from the processing of the apple. But different parts were necessary to go to it, to acquire it, to chew it, or to digest it.
So God already knows. I mean, so God already knows, and the parts, I don't want to think about it as a duality, but that these experiencing parts, not the knowing parts, the experiencing parts, are gaining God's knowledge.
Right.
So it's sort of like a transfer of...
Okay. That's brilliant. So that's why I discriminate between the transcendent God and the immanent God. There's an aspect of God which is beyond description. We cannot describe it. We can experience it, but we can't describe it. So that is eternal, unchanging, immovable. It's all omniscient, whatever. But there's an immanence to God which has to experience in order to develop and to evolve. So in theology it's called process theology, that there's an aspect of God that develops. And this aspect of God develops by self-fragmenting and generating individual units of consciousness that have unique experiences that it then brings back to the hive. Yeah. Carmen, your hand up.
If you take literally what you said, that God is fragmented into billions of pieces, I hope there's still something left, just in case we mess up.
I know. Great question. You hope there's something left in case we mess up. So that's why I insist there is a transcendence of God about which we can say nothing. And then there's the immanence of God, which is developmental. So the truth is, we can't screw up. There's no way of screwing up. Every single experience you have is grist for the mill of your evolution. And so in some senses there are no mistakes. Even if there are things you regret and there are people we have hurt, in some senses we learn from that as much as we learn from our success stories. And so when we know how to look, instead of feeling ashamed about mistakes we've made, we learn from the mistakes we've made. And so actually the word in the New Testament, which is translated into English as sin, it's an archery metaphor. It is to miss the mark. You take a shot at the target and you miss the mark. But that's really important. Did you ever play darts, Carmen? Yeah, so it's a game. Do you play darts here? Yes. Yeah, okay. So there's a little board with a bullseye in it. You know what it is? Okay, yeah. And you're firing these darts. Suppose I put a dartboard over where that picture is there. But I hung a sheet from the ceiling and I say to you, Carmen, I want you to throw the darts over the sheet and see if you can hit the bullseye. But you can't see the board, not even the bullseye. So you're throwing darts over it. There is no way you can improve your aim, because the essence of education is twofold. It is repetition and it is feedback. So if you're getting no visual feedback, you can't see where your darts are landing, you can't improve your aim. Now that's what sin is. Sin is a feedback mechanism where we throw the arts of our thoughts and our words and our actions and we watch where they land. And if we don't like where they land, we change our grip, or we throw higher or to the right or whatever. And so all mistakes are just learning mechanisms. Now, in some senses, from one perspective, it's unfortunate because some of these mistakes result in the death of people. Yeah. So is that really, really bad? It is bad to kill people. But when you look at the eternal viewpoint, all of these experiences that all of these people are generating is a learning curve that's allowing the entire species to evolve. And often we are learning more from the mistakes we make than from the successes we've had. So there's no kind of bad eventual outcome. There are temporary diversions and distractions, which can be very, very painful for ourselves and others. But ultimately, all roads lead back to source. I've said many times that the journey of evolution is a journey that starts in God's womb and ends in God's heart. Yeah. No matter how many distractions we take and diversions we make in the process, we always wind up back in God's heart. Tom.
Yes, Sean. You frequently say, and I think it fits with today, we have a body, but we are not our body. We have an ego, we're not our ego. We have a personality, but we're not a personality. And I agree with that. But then we come into the but know thyself
Yes.
area.
Yes.
And you probably most appropriately sort of shift gears at that point. You really don't talk much about what that self we're supposed to know is. You make suggestions like, why don't you meditate? Why don't you go out in nature? Why don't you play with small kids? But there is this disconnect, maybe a very necessary disconnect, of not really talking about what the self is, other than it's not what we spend 99.9% of our time trying to take care of. Comments?
Sure, absolutely. So I dedicated 3 different books to talking about the self. The first book I called Spirits in Spacesuits. The second one I called Souls on Safari. And the third I called A Sensible Guide. And they're talking about the self. So what I say is that we're not human beings having spiritual experiences. We're spirit beings having human experience. So we're spirits in spacesuits. So when I think about the self, I'm thinking about the spirit in the spacesuit. Now the spacesuit is important. That's my physicality, emotionality, intellectuality, and personality. And we have to learn how to utilize this. But when I say man know thyself, I'm not talking about the ego here. I'm talking about the core essence. So the second book I call Souls on Safari. So we're souls on safari on planet Earth. Another phrase I use often is we are bite-sized pieces of God having a human experience. So that's who the self is. So any time we talk about soul or spirit or essence, we're talking about the self. Anytime I talk about incarnation, I'm talking about a volunteering for a mission on a planet. So who's doing the volunteering? The souls are doing the volunteering. So that's the self. So when Socrates says, man know thyself, or the Buddha says, come awake, or Thomas says today, if you don't know yourself, you're poverty. So the self they're talking about is not this physical carcass with its gifts, which is not to belittle it. We have to celebrate this physical carcass. It's the equipment we need in order to have an incarnational experience. So it has to be honored, but not identified with. So a great Hindu mystic, he was Hindu, Muslim, and Christian. A guy called Kabir, 15th century poet. And he was born into a Hindu family, but his parents died. And he was adopted by a Muslim family and raised as a Muslim. And then he found and adopted Christianity. And he practiced all 3 systems, Hinduism, Islam, and Christianity. He said very famously of Jesus one time, he said, Jesus, blessed be he, once said, life is a bridge. Cross over it, but do not build your house upon it. So they're all the mystics are saying about the same thing is, you have a body, you have a psyche, you have emotions, you have an intellect, you have a personality. These are equipment for the journey, but they don't define who you are. So another example I would use is like when Neil Armstrong went to the moon in 1969. He was wearing a spacesuit that cost probably millions and millions of dollars, to research and design. And he needed it for 2 purposes. He needed to be able to survive in the atmosphere of the moon, and it needed to be able to get around and to do tasks there. So it had to accomplish 2 things, allow him to survive and allow him to be active. And these are just similar spacesuits. Now, if he had disregarded the spacesuit, and had punctured it in some way, abused it in some way, he would have died. And he wouldn't have been effective. And so the same thing is true of these spacesuits. We have to honor them and protect them and nurture them and love them, as well as honor and protect and love the spacesuit of our mother, which is called Gaia, the planet. But the planet itself is only the spacesuit that a great soul is wearing. And this particular body is a spacesuit that Thomas is wearing. And so, but the essence inside that is the eternal unborn part. It's the bite-sized piece of God that is volunteered for human experience. So every time I talk about soul or spirit or essence, I'm talking about the self that needs to be known. Yeah. Do we have to Mike? Okay. Mike and then Patricia. Okay, Mike on the mic.
Long route. I think all of us have thought a lot about who we are, tried to figure it out.
Okay.
We go to therapists and stuff, or whatever. Think about our childhood. And I've done a lot of that, and probably everyone in here has. But I've had a new teacher on knowing myself, and I've mentioned it several times. powerful relationship I have with one of my grandsons started from the beginning. So I've given up, not given up, I'm curious about things, but the way I am discovering myself is recognizing the feeling I have for this person and saying that's really me. And I'll use the word love, but I don't like to use that word because it doesn't cover enough territory. But like people in here feed homeless, and I'm sure they talk to them, and I'm sure they feel for them. And so I'm feeling my stomach as my teacher, who tells me this is the right thing, this is love, this is inspiration, this is what we are.
That's beautiful, Mike. That's beautiful. You know the old statement that when the student is ready, the teacher appears? So you're the student and your grandson is the teacher. So he appeared when you were ready. And I'm even better than lucky guy. But I mean that literally. I mean that literally. If I had continued today's reading from the Gospel of Thomas, the very next story said this. It said, in the days to come, an adult person will ask a 7-day-old child what is truth, and the child will tell him. That was the very next story in this passage. So you're absolutely right on. Absolutely right on. And I believe that there's, every child is precious. Every child is a gift from God. But I believe that recently there's been a special breed of kids coming into the world. They're sometimes called the crystal children. That our world is in such dire straits that we really need an influx of really old souls in order to push us successfully through this crisis time. And obviously your little grandson is one of those beings. So congratulations to you. Yeah. And thanks for being a good student. Okay. Patricia.
I'm going to take us to another place, but I
Good.
think somebody over there who has a question that might be a follow-up, so why don't we let her go, and
Who
I'll
is that?
ask you my question another time.
Is it a follow-on to this, or no? So we'll start with Patricia. Okay.
So if we accept that all the cells in our bodies are, this is a practical question,
Yes.
all the cells of our bodies are, in a sense, bite-sized
Bits of God.
parts of God,
Okay.
that all of those cells are having experiences to bring to the whole. And if we are meditating, as many of us are, on what to do with those cells that are not serving very well,
Yes.
i.e. cancer cells or whatever,
Yes.
or cells that are taking our vision or whatever is happening, how are we supposed to speak to those cells?
Brilliant. That's brilliant, Patricia. It's a great question and a very practical question. What about those actually at a physiological level, those cells of the body that are not cooperating with the totality? So I'll make two responses to that. The first response is that it's incumbent upon each one of us to do everything we can to live completely healthy bodies, physically, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually. But when we've done everything we can do, we've consulted doctors, we've changed our diet, we've meditated, whatever we've done, and let's say cancer still proceeds, then we have to take our understanding to a meta level. And that's the realization that it's part of my mission or part of my program was to experience something for one of two reasons. To allow medical science the opportunity of studying it so they can kind of break through and find solutions physiologically. And secondly, that we can allow the community the opportunity of exercising compassion for people who are suffering. And thirdly, for the person themselves to disidentify with just the physical body and realize you're an eternal being. You were never born to begin with, and you can never die. Your spacesuit had a beginning, and every spacesuit has a shelf life, but you're not any of those. So when you've done everything you can do, and a disease continues to progress, then what you can say is that this was part of my commitment. I expanded that a little bit. There are two ways of looking at illness. One of them is kind of look at the etiology of an illness. How did such and such a thing happen? Is it environmental? Is it genetical? Is it lifestyle? Is it belief system? And the other way of looking at it is to say, what is the purpose of an illness? And they're very different questions. Etiology is very different from purpose. Etiology is the field of medical science, and they can figure out why a thing is happening and maybe what we can do to respond to it. But there's purpose in illness as well. And when we discover what the purpose is, We may be able to cure it, or we may be able to realize that I actually volunteered for this particular circumstance in order to grow myself spiritually, grow my community through compassion, and grow medical science through its ability to study the stuff. So even the the difficult people in our lives, to expand that image then into a community, the body of a community, and there are difficult people in the community who don't seem to be playing ball with the rest of us, on the same page. They can be our teachers. Very, very definitely. And this is what Christ means when he says, you must love your enemies. Because our enemies sometimes are better teachers for us than our friends are. Our friends give us unconditional love, but if we only had friends in our lives, we'd become narcissists. So God arranges that there are difficult people in our lives so that even if they point out with great glee and they widely exaggerate our faults, they're identifying something which needs to be worked with. And so even the difficult people, and you can take that to the Hitlers of the world, which is not in any way to condone what they've done, but is to see what is the lesson I can learn from the situation, in which case there are no wasted messages. Nobody dies without it being purposeful, meaningful, and spiritual, if they're responding to the circumstances with total love, and with care for the self, medically, emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. So, Deborah.
I wanted to share a little bit about the interconnectedness of all life. Last week we enjoyed a story by the Hernandez family at the Children's Mass, and Sean asked the children, where do animals have souls and where do they go? And today you mentioned again that we're all interconnected. And several weeks ago I was shown a very personal experience of that. As some of you know, David and I, in the fall, our cat was sick. And we did everything we knew how to do to take care of her. She's not an elderly cat. And so we took her to the vet and we changed her diet and we worked energetically with her. And, all of those things seemed to have some result, but it didn't go clunk. And I was still more and more concerned about her, and David was as well. And so I prayed from the bottom of my heart that God would show me, or David, or both of us, what we could do to help her. And not 3 days later, I was walking in the house, and in that soft way that you look, I was looking down the hall, and I saw a cat that we had had many years ago that was originally mine and became ours when David and I were married. And I saw her in her small cat form originally out of the corner of my eye. But more importantly, shortly after, I heard her telepathically. And she said, I've come to help. I've come to help Tara. I've had more experience here, and she hasn't. Don't worry, I've come to help. And I could barely contain myself because the tears started flowing, and I knew that my prayer was answered. And I knew that I hadn't been forgotten by her because she and I shared a very, very deep connection. And so she stayed with Tara. I could feel her. And every once in a while, Tara would look as if she was seeing a presence that couldn't be seen in normal vision. But little by little, she started to get better. And her anxiety when David and I would leave, when we would need to leave home, became less and less. And so Callie's presence was in our home for weeks. And just recently, she's not there as much anymore. And we have found ways of helping Tara, putting music on when we're not there. But I bring this up today because I know deep within my soul that we are all connected. And we're never forgotten. And every experience that we have is bringing us closer to who we truly are, and that is love.
That's beautiful, Deborah. That's beautiful, Louie. Thank you so much. Really beautiful. Thank you. Alfred.
Let's go back to DNA for a bit.
Okay.
The classical description of DNA and evolution was that a species might have an individual that has a new trait. If that trait is favorable, then it's passed on to future generations and they prosper. More recently, a new field of study has developed called epigenetics, that the DNA in your body is not necessarily fixed in terms of its operation, that other parts of the DNA may be activated. And it's been used to explain things like addiction. Why would one twin become addicted to heroin and the other one not? So it occurs to me that my mission in my life is through meditation and other exercises to awaken those parts of my DNA that will gravitate me towards God.
Absolutely. That's brilliant, Alfred. That's brilliant. Brilliant. So I'm sure you've come across the work of Bruce Lipton. Yeah. So Bruce Lipton is a biologist, who was one of the founders of the epigenetic movement, and he's written a few books. The first one was called Biology of Belief, which is saying precisely what you're saying, that genes are not determinants of our structure or our health. Genes are more like they're literally blueprints. So if you go to an architect's office, and you decide you want to build a house, and you pick out a blueprint, you can modify it in any way you want. You can say, I don't want a window there, and I want a patio door here where there was an ordinary door. So you can radically alter the blueprint, by your decision making. So the genes are literally just blueprints that we can chop and change using our mindset. There's a guy I've come across very, very recently, and at some stage I want to maybe devote a full homily to wrestling with this material. A guy called Thomas Campbell. He's an astrophysicist, worked with NASA, and he's written a trilogy of books that somebody just sent me. It's 850 pages, and it's called My Big Toe. Yeah? And in physics, My Big Toe in physics is an acronym, TOE, is a theory of everything. So Einstein spent the last half of his life wrestling, trying to create a unified field theory, something that could, unify all the known forces of the universe. But he failed. And there have been many efforts since then. The latest one is string theory. But string theory runs into a whole bunch of paradoxes. And this guy, who's a physicist, claims that the reason they're running into these paradoxes is that they're refusing to factor in consciousness. They're still operating from a model that suggests that if something is not physical, it's not real. So attempting to build a theory of everything while lacking the primacy of consciousness, you're bound to run into paradoxes that you can't explain. So he's written this huge trilogy, and there are just two premises. Now, every scientific system, is built on axioms that can't be proved. Even in mathematics, when I was studying math at college, there were what we call the piano postulates. You have to assume one or two givens in order to create any scientific system. You have to start with an article of faith. You can't start from scratch and create a consistent, logical, mathematical, scientific system. There has to be at least one article of faith. If you start with one, it's more consistent, but it takes longer to build. If you start with two or three, it's less consistent, but you build much faster. So he's created a theory of everything, and the reason he calls it a big toe, because a small toe would be a system that explains the physical universe. A big toe is one that would explain the physical and the metaphysical. So he says, I'm starting with two premises: the primacy of consciousness and the reality of evolution. And using just those two premises, he builds this extraordinary model that he's claiming is resolving all the paradoxes that physics is running into, and is explaining and can factor in paranormal abilities, clairvoyance, clairsentience, telepathy, guide, all these kinds of things. So it's a fascinating area. But when you leave consciousness out of the equation, no matter how good your science is, you're going to run into paradoxes. Now, the kicker is that science itself, even materialistic science, asks us to make this huge act of faith. They say to us, in effect, give us this huge, huge miracle to begin with, and then we can explain away all the other miracles to you. And the huge miracle, you have to believe that there was no first cause, that somehow there was a big bang out of which everything came. The entire universe came out of a big bang. Where did it happen? We have no idea. When did it happen? 13.7 billion years ago. What was there to bang? We have no idea. You just have to make an active belief that there was a first cause. That's a metaphysical assumption. They can't prove that at all. So they're taking a metaphysical assumption and they're deducing that only physical is real, once we've granted them this huge miracle. So why would we grant them this miracle? You know, if we're going to have to assume at least one metaphysical leg or one metaphysical premise in order to construct an adequate science of our experiences, one of them at least has to be metaphysical. It has to posit a reality in which there isn't a first cause because we've transcended the physical world of, cause and effect. So he's created this extraordinary model that he calls his big toe. So at some stage I'd like to delve into this a little bit more. Karen and then Johanna. Okay, very quick question from both of you. And I'm going to give yes or no answers. Johanna.
Just to follow on Alfred's, the sense of the epigenetics, that it seems to me, or my sense of it is, that meditation and time in nature and any sort of creative pursuits actually change that environment that the DNA exists within.
Absolutely. Totally.
And so it has a way of righting the system.
Totally.
So that it becomes healthy.
Absolutely. And so to kind of tie it into my version of my theory of the four versions, there's the predetermined storyline, there's the randomness built into it, there's the free will, and then there's the relationship with the programmer. So in a sense, epigenetics is the free will relationship with the programmer dimension that allows us to change the outcome of the story. Johanna.
I just wanted to tie into your statement about your cat and animals, and I think we're coming into a real era where we're really being taught by our animals. I've countless times felt my dog Bridget around me. More importantly, there was when people used to hunt, they used to relate to their animal and talk to it on some level. But I think that's really been eliminated. But there's a surge of compassion with our animals. I saw yesterday something where this autistic woman grew up not being able to relate to anything but cows, and she has changed the way that we deal with the animals on our farms and the way cattle are treated and things like that. Absolutely amazing. But then I'm sorry, the other part was when we're if we have cancer, you're talking about coming to a different way of looking, but if we have emotional, I'm not going to call them cancers, but things like non-forgiveness or guilt or things like that, how do we look at that in a way that you were looking at cancer?
Okay, so a few weeks ago I created this formula, for effective prayer. AX1 plus BX2 plus CX3 plus DX4 is effective prayer. X1 has to do with purity of heart. That it is very difficult to pray meaningfully for anybody, including myself, if I have resentments in my heart or anxiety in my heart or fear in my heart. And so the first stage of all healing is to empty myself, and to forgive those who've hurt me and to ask forgiveness of those whom I've hurt.
That's the part that I'm talking
That's the
about.
difficult. The second part is compassion. X2 is compassion. And that is the realization, as Deborah said so eloquently, we're all connected. The animals are all part of us. They're all just different ways in which God is experiencing herself, but all of it is God. And so to discriminate between higher and lower forms or more and less important forms is to miss the point. We're all part of the organism. The hand is no more important than the mouth when it comes to eating an apple. And so they're all part of it. The third piece is intentionality. And it has to be laserized intentionality, not just kind of reading from a kind of a script in the back of my mind. I have to really focus on my intentionality, on the person that I'm praying for. And the fourth piece is trust. I have to realize that the system does work like this. I have to understand how the system works. And so emotions are part of the equation of cleansing of the heart. Guys, I thank you for your patience. It's 11 after. So before we continue with our Eucharist, let's offer each other a sign of our peace.